Welcome back. And we are moving into our first conversation for this morning. We have been speaking about this issue with different representatives, and today we're joined by the chair of the Toledo Maya Land Rights Commission, Lise Alamilla. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
So, Lise, I want to start off by just understanding a bit more about the commission itself and who's involved at this point in time to set the backdrop.
All right. Well, the commission was established in 2015, about November of 2015, or January actually, by the time we really started appointing people, January of 2016. And at present we have Randall Shepherd as one of the commissioners, Bartolo and Bartolo Teol. And we have Agassi Finnegan as the liaison between the commission and the Ministry of the Attorney General. And this was set up really to make recommendations to the government of Belize on what measures to take to implement the consent order.
Yes. So this goes back to 2015 when the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled in favor of the Mayan groups that put forward the case on communal land rights.
Yeah. Well, the correct way is really a consent order is an agreement between the parties. It's not the court passing a judgment and determining based on the arguments presented at court that this is how we are going to proceed. But rather it's the parties coming together to make a proposal to the court to say this is how we want, this is the agreement between us.
For the practical side of executing the order.
Well, no, it doesn't give you details, it doesn't say these are the actions that you have to take. It tells you that, for example.
So, and I wanted to set all of that as a backdrop because it really does highlight the very important role that the Toledo Maya Land Rights Commission has. In my mind, and this is using my words, it's almost like a mediator. You will sit with the different representatives and talk with the different representatives to find out how this landmark decision will play out in real life. In other words, where will you delineate the different villages? How will it be used? Who owns it? And things of that like.
Well, I don't know if the correct word is mediate. Really, we are a government body, and we are tasked to consult all interested parties and to put forward recommendations for the government to consider in implementing the order. So mediation, it implies something different. And so you take all that information and so on, and you say, based on what we know is what we think is in the best interest of advancing, these are the recommendations that we move forward to the policymakers. The policymakers would then decide whether they accept our recommendations or not. That's why it's very important to say that we are not there to implement the order, but to make recommendations for the implementation of the order. The commission should not be, in place for a long time. It should stipulate these are the actions we think you need to take, or these are the policies you need to consider. And once that is done and we're satisfied that we have done what is necessary to honor the consent order, then either the commission becomes something else, evolves into something else based on what our findings are, or it dissolves.
So what would you say is the strategy that the commission has in place to be able to get to the point of recommendations?
Well, Marlene, this process, I think a lot of people imagine that this is a quick fix. This really isn't a quick fix. Everyone would want it to be a quick fix, but the process of consulting people is very slow. And we're finding out as time goes by, more and more people are understanding this and understanding that they will be impacted, and that in fact it is in their interest to get involved. So that is one of the aspects of the work that we're doing.
You were saying that those were the members. Is that the full complement of membership of the commission?
Yes.
So a commission normally has representative from all the stakeholders. And our primary stakeholders are probably the Mayans. But there's no representative of the Mayans on a commission to deal with issues in relation to them.
Yeah,
Am I missing something?
That is, no, I mean, a commission is formed however you want it to be. I think sometimes people think that is the only way that it should be. It should be representations from other parties. This is a government commission appointed by government parties only that the commission thought would be appropriate to consider. Remember that we have to find a balance while we consider all the rights of the Mayas and contemplate those to make sure that we protect those rights that they have gotten through the courts. Those rights, by the way, have not been identified. There's not a list that says these are the rights that you have to protect. That's part of the exercise. And it doesn't say these are the lands that need to be protected. It just tells you that Maya customary land rights exist in the Toledo district. But in this case, the government decided that it was not willing or did not think in the best interest that it would be opening it up to a wider group of people.
Just one more, just the Mayas.
Yeah, well, not only the Mayas are affected by this, though.
But they're one of the primary stakeholders.
Yes, they are, but they're not the only ones affected. And so government has to consider that whatever recommendation it puts forward will consider all the other groups of people that may be affected by this order. So we have in place, for example, going to establish a bilateral technical committee. And that is where we're going to have Maya people represented or the Maya groups represented.
It's a very complicated process because, as you said, the judgment is a bit ambitious. It's a bit wide, non-specific.
Yes.
And it's a new process for Belize.
Yes.
But the complaint from the Mayans has been that government has not been honoring the judgment itself. How do you respond to the cynicism that possibly the commission is just red tape, that government is simply putting together a mechanism, and because it controls the mechanism, I'm just asking you to respond to it, which kind of delays something that is kind of like a Rubik's Cube. Every time you move something, something else moves. It creates different issues. But that the commission is simply just red tape.
Well, I don't know how we can be a red tape. We don't make policies. I wouldn't.
You want me to explain?
Yes, perhaps, yeah,
Okay.
because I read tape.
You set up a commission. A commission is set up which doesn't help to bring in the effective judgment, but simply recommends as to say it's a step within a step. It has no power except to make recommendations. It creates a step rather than moving to execute on the judgment, to set up particular mechanisms and structures. It can only recommend.
But yes, but that has to be, somebody has to make recommendations before you make a decision. Someone has to do the work of putting forward something for the policymakers to consider. And so I don't think that you can go from just a judgment to making policy without doing the technical work and the consultations that are necessary. I mean, that would be impossible. Who would hire the consultants and review the consultancies and the proposals being made before that you take it up to, which would be taking it up to my minister, which would be the Attorney General, who then, his ministry would review it and decide whether it's ready to be taken up to cabinet to be considered. So it's just a process. I think that, you know, I hear everybody saying, oh, this has been from 2015, nothing has happened. And you know what? Every country that you look at, it's not this doesn't get fixed in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Some countries are still at it 50 years, 100 years later. It's not that this is what, I mean, we want to do.
Can I ask one
But do you have a timeline set out for the commission?
There's not a fixed timeline. Because with the nature of the job, you can't put a fixed timeline. No. You just cannot do that. You would want to be ambitious. We're ambitious in hoping to move this as quickly forward as possible. Yeah. But for example, you could say, I take forward a policy based on the discussions we've had with all parties at our level. Mm-hmm. We take that forward to the Attorney General. They will say, well, actually, we don't agree with this and we don't think this is doable. So that has to go through a whole revision process. And then that goes through its own process, whatever the ministry decides is necessary, whether they want to circulate it to all the other ministries and have consideration. And they could send it back and say, well, we don't agree with this. We think that this area needs to be reconsidered, and maybe you have to go back to the table to negotiate these things, right?
Well, that's kind of why I said mediation, because it is where you will be the liaison in between. But I wanted to go back to something more critical, which is, you know, Kevin suggested perhaps after the ruling there could have been mechanisms established, but that, in my mind, would have had dangers of being a very top-down approach to addressing this issue, and I see it needing to have the involvement of all those who will be affected, whether it's Mayans who live in the community, those who live in the fringes, and even, of course, establishing laws for the wider Belizeans as well. What is the level of involvement? Because I think this is where the concerns we hear from the Mayan community more than anything else.
Are you hearing it from the Maya community, or
from their spokesperson?
Okay, well.
And we've been joined by the alcaldes as well to hear about this. But I'll give you a chance to say that, to go further into that. But their primary concern is how the consultations are being done, what they view as a lack of urgency in addressing the matter. And as I said before, instead of going top-bottom, I see this more as a bottom-up approach. The people who live there should be the ones to say, this is what we want, and then you look at the laws, or you look at what will be feasible for a country to be able to do, and then make a decision from there, put forward your recommendations from there. So can we talk about the concerns specifically about the level of urgency and how the consultations are being executed?
Well, first of all, Marlene, the commission is the mechanism put in place. Mm-hmm. So there is a mechanism in place. Yeah. If you want to be careful with your words, that's the mechanism that we have in place. Mm-hmm. In regards to the consent order. In regards to consultations, we have made every attempt to go into all the villages, not only the Maya villages. Remember that there are either 38 or 39 Maya villages, depends how you count it, because some of them are settlements. We try mostly to consider a village, a Maya village, a village that has an alcalde. And so we have gone into the villages. Not all of them have accepted us. Some of them have been very clear and say, we are not prepared to engage with you because our representative is the Toledo Alcalde Association, and we have respected their choice not to engage with the commission. Other villages have said, well, actually, we do want to meet with you. Mm-hmm. We have had all sorts of scenarios where an alcalde will say, yes, come, and then another person will say, don't come. Mm-hmm. And we had one situation where we were having a meeting, and someone came in the morning of the meeting earlier in the day and said, you know, Ms. Alamilla, we would love to have you come and visit, but we are not prepared right now. We will contact you when we have a date set up. I said, fine, you know, that makes, just to let us know. Not even 15 minutes later, someone else, one of the leaders, came in and said, well, Ms. Alamilla, I'm here for you to give me assurances that you are going to come into the village to have the consultation that was set up. because we understand that the commission likes to make meetings and doesn't show up. And I was like, well, that has never happened. Every time we set up a meeting, we show up. So we were a bit confused about, is this meeting happening? Because you have two leaders coming in, giving you separate information. So just to be careful, we did go to the village. Of course, these villages are far. You take a distance, but we said, you know, it's important that we go out there. And when we went there, there were a group of people waiting for us. There are conflicts in these villages. There's conflicts between the alcaldes and the village chairman. Some of them will say, well, the village council should never have been introduced in these villages because we have our own traditional system of governance, and the village council system undermines the alcalde system. That may be so, but that is what we have to work with.
So
right?
who are you working with, the alcaldes or the village chairman?
We're working with both.
Both, yeah. Because, and that's part of what needs to be clear, because the Mayans have their traditional practices, you know, and I think the validation of the courts is really saying that, you know, you have had and existed in this manner for so long on this particular area, and it should be respected. Now, the alcalde system I've always used as what is a shining light in this country, although it has its challenges, especially when you speak to people of the villages, but it is recognized in our laws. Their authority is recognized for certain actions in the village. Now, because of that sensitivity and being able to fully understand how a community responds to any person who comes in with information or wants to be a part of a decision-making process, it means that the commission itself has to be equipped to be able to navigate what are the traditions there. What type of preparation for the commission? Have you spoken with perhaps representatives of the Mayan communities, used a third party perhaps to go in, something to be able to break down the barrier between what they know as their tradition and how we would function separately?
No, our job is to just go in and say, we want to have a meeting with your village. We write, in this case, we write both the village council and the alcaldes, because in certain villages, they work hand in hand with each other and they respect each other's different role. Excuse me. And in other villages, they have conflict between each other. Our job is, we are not there to resolve their conflict. That is their own internal business, right? Because really that would be an impossible task. And furthermore, that is not our role. They have to resolve whatever they have in place. If you're saying that their traditional system is respected, is working, then that system, along with whatever other support that they need or want, that is for them to resolve amongst themselves. So what we have done is we just, first we would send out a letter just to the alcalde and to say, and to the village council chairman, and say we would like to come into your village to make a presentation you know, they have welcomed us, as I said earlier. And then we found out that in fact sometimes the alcalde hasn't shared this information with the village, right? So then we started writing, which just becomes a lot more work in the sense of writing. I think 6 or 7 people sit on the village council. We have to write, because we send out 9 invitations now. The first alcalde, the second alcalde, and the 7 members of the village council. So that everyone is aware that we have at least reached out to engage them. And if they don't want us to come in, we will respect that, right? So that is how, like I said again, and I think that's important to repeat, is that we are not there to resolve conflicts that they have amongst and between themselves. That is not our role.
Okay, but can I still want to understand this further, because understanding the process will help us know how far it's gotten and you know, just whether or not it is successful. And so we've had what seems to be a trial and error period. You know, you reach out to alcalde, village council, realize you need to send the invitation to everyone. But it's been 2 years, and in the consultation period that perhaps failed in the beginning and there was miscommunication, I'm sure there have been lessons learned and ways to re-strategize to move forward.
We have a work plan that we've developed.
Yeah.
That was consulted with the various stakeholders. And so that work plan outlines and charts the way forward. What are the actual activities that we need to carry out?
Who are these stakeholders that were involved?
We have different layers of consultations. You have the right holders. The right holders are referred to the Maya people.
Yeah.
And then you have other stakeholders. For example, we have engaged the National Garifuna Council because they have Barranco that's right there, you know, with Midway being on one of their boundaries. We have also engaged DAVCO, the District Association of Village Council. We engage the NGOs that work in anything in regards to land, be it protected areas mostly, protected areas management, we have engaged them. And then we engage government departments, those who work in Toledo. So we have tried to, as much as possible, get feedback from as many people as possible, because you know, when you engage with the agricultural extension officer, I mean, they are the people on the ground actually being dealing with the issues of land and the conflicts in regards to land between villages. So you can get a lot of information from them. Okay, this is actually what's happening on the ground. So those are the people that were consulted. Those are the people that we consulted for the work plan. But the more effort and focus came from the Toledo Alcalde Association. They were very, very much engaged in the work plan.
I just want to clarify something, because then you're speaking of their involvement, but the Maya Leaders Alliance and the Toledo Alcalde Association went back to the court to express their concerns on the very same work plan, saying that it was, I believe, unilateral, that they felt that the consultation or that they didn't have the input in the work plan that they should have had.
But they did. If I showed you all the drafts and the different communications that we had, and this is what I'm saying, if you're looking for perfection, you're never going to get it, right? If I send you, if we have a draft work plan and I send it to you and I review it and I accept 70% of it, how can you say that it is a unilateral decision? Yeah. That you did not get 100% of what you wanted change? Yeah. Then that is different to say you didn't accept 100% of what I put forward, then that is the truth. But to say that this was a unilateral document, that the process did not really consider them, then that is false, right? And perhaps the commission, well, we have taken the position, Marlene, that we would not come out here and nitpick on everything that they have said to the public. Some people may agree, some people say we need to come out and say every detail of how the process has happened, how the interaction has been. I don't think that will get us anywhere, you know. Your questions are leading to that, though, that, you know,
it gives you a chance to respond to what has already been publicly declared. And in balance and fairness, that's ideally what we're aiming to be able to achieve here.
Yes.
But
let me finish my thought. You can continue to respond to everything that is put out in the media, right? Or you can continue, or you can take the position that this is a difficult difficult work that we're doing, and people will have very different ideas of how you want to do it. So we can spend the time trying to discredit each other, or we can spend the time trying to work on this. And if you're spending time trying to discredit each other, you can't be saying that you're working in good faith. Because when at the end of the day, what you're working with people, right? And so the minute you start attacking one another and you start discrediting one another, how can you then say we're working in good faith? And so a lot of things happen at the court that what is said publicly isn't what happened at the court. For example, the Toledo Alcalde Association or the appellants went and said, we object to them speaking to other groups. We don't think that the only people you need to speak with are the Toledo Alcalde Association or the MLA. We said we are speaking to you, but we are not only going to speak to you because there are different positions and views on how this thing should be rolled out. And the court told them, are you saying that government has no right to speak with its own people, to engage other groups of people? You know, of course not. Then they backtrack and say, well, but they still repeat the same thing, you know? So I think the more you repeat it, it becomes reality, and we have not come out here to debunk it or to say otherwise, because where it matters is in a way, you're saying something. We feel that we are always examining ourselves. Are we doing right by the process? Are we being fair in the process? Are we being transparent in the process? Can we, if we are examined by the courts, would they, if they chastise us about something, for example, maybe you shall consider their input. Last time the court told them, you can't decide who the commission hires as a consultant. That is a decision of the commission. But they repeat that, that they were not involved in the selection of the consultant. Okay. So there's a separation, and I think that is the challenge that we're facing right now. There's a separation, a role of roles that we each have, that all the parties have. And until we understand that there's a separation of roles, that yes, that we can come together and discuss and dialogue, and then afterwards, we, the commission, we have to consider the input of everyone. So when we put forward something, it's based on considering everyone that we have spoken to and the advice that we have gotten from the experts that we have spoken with.
Can we go a little bit further to a place that's probably a little bit uncomfortable? This is a hot potato issue. It's a very difficult issue, extremely difficult, and anybody who is not on the side of the commission is probably a bit short-sighted, because this is an issue which will transcend governments. Governments will come in, governments will go out. This will be a difficulty for any and everybody. You put the best politicians in there, the best government in there, and this will be an issue. From what you're saying, it almost seems, some people might say that there's an audacity coming from the community. There's a bigger issue, though, that an issue which is already complicated and for which the government hands is tied. And let me explain to you what I'm saying. The Maya constituency is a huge block of voters to the political directorate. You can't, if you touch this wrong, and the Maya community looks at it and pinpoints that this particular political entity is somehow wrong, you're not winning in Toledo. That's just not going to happen. And so as a smart political strategy, it cannot be that you go in there to execute in the way that you would a normal judgment. And so surely there is some wisdom in the way that the commission has been set up and is trying to delicately do it. But that delicate situation is now compounded by a legal judgment. So you have a politically sensitive issue, and then you have a legally reinforcement.
Telling you do it.
Is it ever, do you see us ever being able to please all parties? And let me tell you why this is important. As we go on, and as time is going on us, I'm in court, and I'm seeing at least 2 lawsuits against the government of Belize. And when you have a lawsuit, it's not, the government doesn't have a separate amount of money. We're talking about taxpayers' money. And both cases are for millions of dollars. One is for 1 point something, 1.8 I think million, and the other one is for significantly more. So the more that we are not dealing with it and our hands are tied, our bill is racking up. Do you see us being able to expedite and to be able to please all parties in a way that respects their rights, but doesn't compromise the country's?
I believe so. I believe that really what you're doing is saying this already exists. This Maya customary land tenure and Maya customary rights exist in our country already. It's very alive and being practiced in Toledo, right? So we're not introducing something new. We're just trying to capture what that is, and there's a lot of information available. And based on that, take affirmative measures to protect these rights and to make, whether, for example, in some countries, you may determine that a policy is what is necessary. That a policy on Maya customary land rights and tenure is what is necessary, and that would be an affirmative measure. You might decide that you need to draft new legislation and amend our existing legislation. That would be an affirmative measure. Another thing that we have, and those things, by the way, are included in the work plan. Then we have the consultation framework. You see, they often talk about free, prior, and informed consent, right? And we interpret that based on our own ideas of what free, prior, and informed consent looks like. Yeah. But the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People doesn't give you a recipe. Yeah,
it doesn't tell you how far in advance.
No, it doesn't tell you this is how free, prior, and informed consent looks. It tells you that you should have free, prior, and consent, and based on dialogue with the state has with its own people, it determines how free, prior, and informed consent. So when they're saying you are in fact contravening free, prior, and informed consent, Belize hasn't defined what free, prior, and informed consent looks like, right? Costa Rica has only just done theirs, and they have been at it for a while, right? And so that is something, it's a consultation framework that we have. The Toledo Alcalde Association put forward one that they drafted, I don't know, a few years ago. And they say, this is the way we want to be consulted. I think it's a good document to begin the process with, but government can't just accept that in its totality. Government has to review it and see if it can, in fact, realistically honor the process. And because remember, this is a sovereign state we're also talking about. And we're talking about finding a balance that between all its people. It's not only the Mayas that live in Belize, right? So you have to think, and there are other interests. There's development, there general Horizon 2030, if you want to say, this is where Belize wants to go. So you have to think about all of these things before you just say it's going to be prescribed by you about how the government is going to proceed with that. So that is something. So those are some of the things that we have. Yeah. One of the things that is very much a stickler, and people are disagreeing on it, is that they think that we should go and demarcate all these 39 villages and issue titles. Yeah. Titles. But in the work plan, we have developing the framework to identify where Maya lands exist. And so you will have a discussion with everyone to say, what are you going to do about the fact that there are Mayas who have title to the lands within these communities? What are you going to do in regards to the lands where leases are in existence? Are you going to ask government to cancel all those leases? Are you going to ask government to buy back all these lands that are privately held? What really are you going to do? What are you going to do in regards to the protected areas that exist within the Toledo district? Are you going to change maybe the categories? Are you going to, in fact, allow more activities to happen? Or are you just going to de-reserve these areas and declare them to all be Maya lands?
Yeah. There
right?
are a lot of steps that have to
You
be
see what? So
executed.
all of those little, it sounds little when I'm listing them, but
No, it's
Those are not little. Those are not little. And that's where, but see, this is where I'm trying to get the clarification that's necessary, because to me those are the bigger questions that have to be answered.
But those are the things, Marlene, that are the affirmative measures. Yeah. Those are the things that eventually for government to make this consent order realistic,
you have to take all these things
you
into
have to end up with those things, because what are the lands? You can't just say whatever you decide are the lands. What happens to a village that borders a non-Maya village, a village that perhaps was in existence long before that village came to be? How do you address that matter? How are you going to resolve that conflict? Is it government going to come and impose and say, these are where the boundaries are between these villages?
Can I then get a bit of, just in the interest of time, I don't mean to cut you off, but we know that Satim has a year ago put forward a process in how they demarcated the boundaries for Prikisarko in consultation with the villages there. Their concern is that they've put it forward and they've heard no response. Can you speak from the Land Rights Commission, just whether you've received it, whether it's being looked at, and what's the process there?
Well, I was invited to the launch, and I went to the launch. That's all the information I have. I have asked Froila to please come to the commission to make a presentation so that we can really dig into it a bit more.
And see if it's feasible.
You know, I'm very curious, and based on what was presented there, I think it's definitely something that's worth considering. It has a lot of merit. Government wasn't engaged in the process, and that is perfectly fine. But now, so that hasn't happened. From the end of the commission, I have asked Ms. Salam to please let us have a meeting so we can get clarity. I have 100 questions for Ms. Salam. There's one part of that village boundary that is unresolved with a bordering village. You know, that just shows you that even they couldn't agree within themselves how to resolve that. So those are the discussions that you would have. What would you do in that case?
But what it is a sample, not necessarily the final part, but it's a sample methodology that can be used in all the other villages.
Yes. There are different schools of thoughts on demarcation of villages and identification of where the boundaries are. Some people say, you know what, you can say, describe an area and say this. For example, you can say, in this area, and you describe it, bounded in the north by this river and this river. This is where Maya customary land rights exist. And then you start narrowing it further. Some people are of the opinion that the demarcation and the decisions between where those boundaries are should be resolved by their own traditional processes. Some people are saying no, that is government's role. Government has to come in because there's so much conflict. But you know, the minute government comes in and it makes a decision this way, one group will be happy, another group will not be happy. Some people are saying, well, you know, we have satellite imagery from the 1970s. That you can look back now from the 70s and say, actually these villages existed, there was farming in this area, and we can track back historical use of the land up to the 1970s, or if there's other information, you can go as detailed as that. The commission will not do that work, right? That's not the work of the commission. That is the discussion. How far the commission goes is deciding that that needs to be done, and that this is how you should go about doing it, and that either one, you create a new department or unit within the Ministry of Natural Resources for them to do that exercise, or you set up, because this issue is not going to just be fixed. There will always be conflicts, just as there are conflicts all over this country in regards to land.
There are different interests involved, and that, I think that is understood. That's where your work is most critical as the commission, because it leads me to wonder, in your consultations, while taking account of all views, you're having different views within the villages. You're having organized groups having one view, and then those who are non-attached having another view. So where do you formalize what you're hearing from the villages?
At the commission level.
I know, but if you are hearing conflicting views and conflicting recommendations, what's your process in being able to say, okay, this is what this Mayan village is recommending if you're hearing different views within that same village? Do you go with a formal group? Do you go with those on the fringes? Do you go with the outlier?
It varies. We've gone into the villages to hold consultation. At this point, we have moved to a different level where we're talking with the leaders. Because, you know, you're saying respect our traditional governance system. So we are speaking with the alcaldes, or the Toledo Alcalde Association, or the Maya Leaders Alliance. And so we have moved to that level.
Okay.
So we really haven't had conflicting views between the groups giving us.
Oh, okay.
I haven't found that to be. It's mostly between the commission's view on how what are the activities that need to be implemented. And, you know, sometimes you look at the work plan and we argue, the arguments are whether you put an or, you know. And what I have said, the work plan is a planning document. It's not a legal document. It's a dynamic document. And so we spent a lot of time, and finally the truth is I took the work plan because it had a lot of language, and I scrubbed it of all this fancy language that could just be, that we would just be buried in the language, and simplify the language and say, let us be clear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the activities that we're going to do. A year from now, we may have learned something different, and we will make changes to the work plan, right? It's a living document, and so much time is spent on every little detail of a 2-year work plan that eventually the commission has to say, we're satisfied that we can move forward.
To move into action.
Yeah, that we can move forward with this, with the implementing the order. The other parties are of the opinion, no, until we say that the work plan is finished and complete, then we can move forward. The court told them, no, you can't object. I mean, you don't have the authority to say government can't proceed. You see, but the court shouldn't have to tell us that. The court, it's just like, what I'm trying to say is these changes are going to come in increments, small increments. Look, I've been doing advocacy work for a long time, right? With protected areas. I've been around doing protected areas work. The protected areas, we've done a lot of achievements in Belize. I mean, amazing achievements in protected areas. That didn't happen overnight. That was a long process. In the 1980s, we developed the Protected Areas Policy and Systems Plan, right? And that document continues to inform what is happening. So that I think I know that we're running out of time.
Yeah, and I have one last question to ask.
We have to think that there's the attorney that we had, the commission, said, look, the legal wrangling, we're done with that. All the wrangling, court actions, all of this is done with that. We're now in the implementation part of it. It seems that we're still arguing court matters, but we're really beyond that.
Okay, and my final question, if you indulge me, is the first thing in getting something done is knowing who you're talking to. And we seem to be locked into exactly that, which is this judgment and what Maya land rights are and all of that. But there's oil, there's minerals down there. And we've had in other jurisdictions where you've had native or indigenous people occupying a property, a piece of land that they've always been, but there's minerals underneath it. And then you have these multinational, international business people who fund and create mischief because simply, it's easier to negotiate with a smaller group, which is not a government, and to get things from it than it is to negotiate with a government. Can we be satisfied that, and I also believe that there's nothing random. There's no randomness in the difficulty that we're having in the competition between an alcalde and a village chairperson wanting to be at the table. It comes down to finances. It's an economic thing. If I'm negotiating with the Maya leaders, they become the economic group that have the power to be able to do other things. If I'm negotiating with the village chairman, they have the economic power to make certain decisions. How much are we looking beyond just what the paper is to the fact that it might be that there are other forces and other factors who have interest in the land itself? They don't care about the Mayan people. They don't care about the land rights. They know that oil is underneath there. They know that gold is there. And they want to find a way to compromise this process so that they can get to it at a cheap cost. Is that too much of a conspiracy theory to believe that there's other factors at play, apart from what the distractions politically, what the distractions are practically to get structures out? That there are forces out there who are putting money. What is happening, what is being done, what the court processes and all these cost money, and I don't know where the money is coming from. That we have not done our due diligence to find and track the money. Where's the money coming from? To know who we're negotiating or who is on the other side of the table. Because the face might be the Maldives Alliance, but behind it there might be something else. Is that too much of a conspiracy theory?
I don't know if I fully understand what you're asking. I understood earlier in regards to, for example, you used the example of oil, right?
Yes.
And so remember, mineral rights are held by the government, regardless of where they are.
Royalties aren't though.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the things that really you have to negotiate as part of this. Those are the proposals that have to be made forward when it comes to, and that's not only, like I said, a lot of the things that the Mayas are bringing are things that are really similar all over this country.
I just didn't want the government to be clueless in terms of, because sometimes we approach things in a very naive, Belize-centered way, and we don't factor the long-term goals of persons and entities and forces who might be better prepared in terms of, they've dealt with this before in Costa Rica, they've dealt with this already in Las Vegas, they've dealt with this, and so, oh, Belize going through it now? Good. And they're compromised this way? Good. And we get that done.
I hope it's a conspiracy theory.
I really hope that we are aware of the possibility.
Let me bring this back, because
But
I think one of the things that it does highlight, that is an issue that comes out of it, is that there will be interest in the area for development and for use of the resources in many different
across
ways.
this country.
Yeah. And until this, some will say, until this matter is settled, it will make it more challenging to get what is always seen as a lesser developed portion of this country to the development level that we want to see it at. So it really underscores this process, how critical it is that we're able to make progress. Resolution will take a long time, as you've stated, from even what we're seeing in other countries, but to make progress. And I want to give you the opportunity as we close, because you very clearly said you're moving past the consultation phase, recognizing...
Well, no.
Well, moving across the general consultation to working with leaders, and you want to move into your action plan. So tell us what is next in the work of the commission, that we can all know that there's progress being made in this
Well,
effort.
the one thing we're working on right now is developing a policy for Maya customary land rights. That's what we're doing. That's like the big exercise we're doing right now. And we're also trying to find additional funds to implement the work plan. This is going to cost us millions of dollars. So that's right now what we're doing. I mean, if I had more money...
and are you looking for international grants? And
yeah, we're looking, you know, if we had more money, we could have a lot of these activities happening simultaneously. But of course, the flip side of that is that you it's consultation fatigue because you're going to have it talking to the same people. The Mayas are saying to us, well, look, we have all this information. You don't need to consult. You don't need to hire any consultants. We have all the information. If they have all the information, then I would suggest that they bring forward the information and present it in a manner for government to consider it. Nothing bars the Toledo Alcalde Association from bringing forward documents for government to consider. Right now, the onus is all on the commission, and all the criticism is all on the commission not doing anything. I'm satisfied that we are doing the best we can based on the limitations that we have. But nothing bars them. If they have access to all the experts, world experts that they say they have, then why don't you bring those people together and you bring something forward? A lot of what the changes that have happened in Belize that are admirable have been led by civil society organization. And government is very good. Belize is really unusual in that we take serious consideration to what is brought forward from civil society organizations.
So bring it forward. That's what you're saying to them. We have to wrap up this segment. But
you see, Elsa, you have to give me the whole show.
But we want to thank you for coming in and bringing in the perspective specifically of the commission. We've heard many different sides of this issue, and it is important that we're able to share the government's perspective via the commission as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you too, and I'll make a promise here that that I will be coming back. Well, at least I'm willing to come back more often to keep the nation informed about what is happening. Like I said, it was a decision not to do it, hoping that things would balance out in its own, find its own levels. But I think it's important that the nation be kept informed because this is going to impact in some way, shape, or form all of us. So, but thank you very much, and thank you for the questions and food for thought.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the recruitment drive for Toledo Trade and Vocational Schools. So stay tuned.